So just a reminder, looking at this sketch that we have here, last time we went ahead and did all of our darts. So we have those horizontal and vertical darts done on the front of the shell and of the lining. And then we've got our vertical darts here on the back of the shell and of the lining, both stitched. So today what we're going to do is we're going to stitch the rest of the seams for the front. So we'll stitch both of these waistline seams for our waistband, our hip seams, which are these diagonal seams here, and then our princess seams on both the front, the back, and the front and the back of the inside layers, the facing and lining layers. So we've got quite a bit to do today. But whenever we stitch those back layers, the front will be all in one since there's no center seam going down the middle. But on the back, what we're doing is we're constructing each side from top to bottom. But we will not stitch this center back seam until later. Next week, whenever we come into class, we will be doing our invisible zipper right down that back seam, and we need a full long seam in order to apply the zipper. So that's why we have to get both sides of our back constructed first before we stitch them together at center back. So let's go ahead and switch over to our other camera, and we'll get started on that. Okay, so I've got my pieces separated out and organized. This first stack that I have here are all of the shell pieces, those outside pieces for the front of my dress. So I've got, let's see, starting at the top, I've got my front bodice, my front waistband, and then for the skirt, we've got our center front skirt piece, our little hip pieces that will get inserted there, and then my side front piece. And I'll scoot this all up so you can see. Oops, opposite sides. There we go. So side front here. So once we get those little hip piece in, it'll create this nice long curve for us to add our side front. So I'm actually going to start kind of from the bottom and work my way up since we have more piecing to do on the skirt. I'm going to start there and then work my way up to the waistband and up to the bodice. So starting here, this is my front skirt piece. I'm going to do this straight seam first for that little hip piece. That way I have a nice long curve here to attach that side front whenever we get there. So I'm going to set my side front aside for a second. And we're going to attach these two little hip pieces. Make sure, especially if you're working with a solid fabric, make sure that you're looking at the right side of the fabric and that right side is staying consistent on all of your pieces. On my particular fabric, the right side is a little bit shinier and the back side is more matte. So that's what I'm using to differentiate and make sure that I'm using right sides together. So I'm going to take those little hip pieces, match up both of my corners, and there's a half inch notch up here at the waistline that shows me what my seam allowance will be. So match up those little corners first, and then I'll pin just right in the middle. And I'll do that for both right sides together. Okay, let's go stitch both of those at half an inch. Okay, over here, I'm going to start at that waistline notch. Excuse me. Here we go. Okay, so starting at that waistline notch, there's a little notch on the skirt piece that matches up with the corner of the hip. So right at that corner is where my stitch should start. And then follow along at half an inch. And again, it should go all the way to this corner down here. point, just like that. I'm going to do the same for the other side. This one I'm going to stitch from the bottom up just so that I can have my pins over on the right-hand side of my machine. Let's start right at that corner. Working my way to the other corner. Okay, let's go bust these open on our ironing board. Okay, so trim your threads up first. And then these are both flat seams, so we should be able to just bust them open on our flat ironing board and press them. If you're worried about burning your fabric or leaving any marks, you can see how different the color is on mine whenever it's ironed, whenever it's warm versus light. Then I definitely suggest using your pressing cloth. I'm not going to use mine today just so it's easier for y'all to see what's happening on camera, but you'll need to use it throughout this process to protect your fabric. Okay, now flipping back over to the right side of the fabric, I've got those two little hip seams sewn, and that gives me a really nice, smooth, curved area to stitch in my side front. So I'm gonna grab my side front. Doesn't really matter which one you start with. I happen to grab this one over here. And we're gonna go ahead and start pinning that together. Again, make sure you're doing it right sides together. So I'm gonna flip that, and you'll see most of this will be straight down here, but up at this hip area, it will have opposing curves. So I'm gonna start down at the bottom, pinning my reference points. So at the hem, you can match up those corners, and then there's a notch right at that 1.5 inch mark, which is the marking for our hem allowance. So match up that corner and that little notch. About midway, you're going to have another notch to match up. And then I'm going to do the corners up here. So corner of my side front is going to match that corner of the hip piece. Okay, and then right here in the middle of the curved area, we have a notch on our side front that matches up with the seam of our hip piece. And so when those match up, because this seam is going at a diagonal, it's not straight. So whenever you're matching that notch up, what you're going to do is kind of fold back your seam allowance, and that notch should be pointing. So I'm going to use a pin to kind of illustrate it. That notch should be pointing at the seam where the 1/2 inch stitch line is, because we're stitching this at a 1/2 inch. So we're not worried about it matching at the raw edge. We're worried about it matching at the stitch line, which in our case is 1/2 inch. So this little notch here, which is right here, should be pointing to that seam as it comes across the stitch line. So that's how you're going to pin those together. Okay, and then we're going to work our way through those curved areas. This should be pretty similar to the way that we did the curved seams on our lining sample for our notebook, where we bend it over our finger and pin it together. So this morning I illustrated the way this works, or the reason we do it is because if you look at this side, whenever I try and lay those flat together, you may be able to see, let me see if I can get it a little closer. But whenever I have those flat, you can see how one is pulling away and kind of rippling away from the other. So if you have it flat, it's going to be really hard to pin those together. But whenever I curve it, over my finger, looking at it from the side view, those now match each other and one is not rippling away from the other. So that's why we curve it over our finger as we pin to help those curves match together. Okay, I've got a little bit more of a curve right here. I'm gonna do this straight area first, and then it curves a little bit right here. So I'll work my way up to that curve. Okay. And then when I get to that little curved area, again, just bend it over my finger to help those match. And we'll do the same as we stitch. We will curve it up as we stitch. And you'll notice my pins are much closer together on that curved area to help control it versus further apart on that straight area, because the pieces will behave a lot easier on a straight seam than they will on a curve. Okay, we're gonna go stitch that together and then we'll come back and do our other one as well. Okay, coming over to the machine, I want to have my front piece on top. So that way when it curves, it naturally wants to curve towards that front piece. So this, I'm going from the hem up, just so my pins are sitting on the right-hand side of my machine. But this piece on top is my center front skirt. On the pattern pieces, I think it's just called skirt front. And then the one sitting on the bottom is the side front. And you'll see when we get to that hip area that it's wanting to curve towards that front skirt. So as I curve up, it'll be easier to do so with this one on top. If I were to flip it and had that side front on top, it would want to curve down, and we can't really curve down as we're sewing because we have a sewing machine in the way. So for this one, I'm just working my way from the hem up to that curved area. And then when I start to get to the curved area, I'm just going to pick it up right here in front and make sure my raw edges are still even and just curve that up as I feed it into the machine. And if it also helps, you can lift it up as it comes out of the machine as well. Make sure as you cross over that seam that it stays busted open. Back to our ironing board. Okay, looking at the wrong side, we should have that curved seam from the hip down to the hem. I'm not going to bust it open quite yet because I'll do both of these at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to my other side front piece, and we're going to do the exact same process with that one. Lay it right sides together. I'm going to start down at the hem, matching it up. There's that notch that's an 1.5 inches in for the actual hem depth. Single notch about halfway. My notch here that matches up with my hip seam. And again, that should match at the stitch line, not at the raw edge. So I usually fold mine back just like this and make sure that that notch is pointing to the seam at that 1/2 inch mark. And then my corner. Okay, and we're going to bend this over our finger to match up those curves and pin those together. Okay, let's go ahead and go stitch this one as well at 1/2 inch. Okay, so again, I want my center front on top because it's naturally going to want to curve in that direction. So for this one, I'm going to start up at the waistline, or not waistline, it's up at the top of the hip area. And then just pick it up and let it curve as it goes in and out of the machine. And then keep that seam busted open as you cross over. Getting stuck on my foot. There we go. Okay, let's take these over. We're going to clip those curved areas and then bust them open and press. Okay, bringing it over here, I'm gonna look at the inside and taking a look at these curves. You're going to have an inside curve where it's kind of curving towards that inside layer and an outside layer of the curve. Notice this inside one is the one that's rippling. So we need to do triangles on this side. So we'll take out those triangles to remove fabric because we're going to have excess here. And then this outside one is more taut. So for that one, we're just going to do the slits that will allow it to spread as we bust it open. First, I'm going to separate this curved area from this straight area. So through both layers, I'm just going to slit right where it starts to turn into a nice straight seam. I went through both of those And now I can just clip this top curve area. So triangles on that inside curve that's closest to me. And they'll get closer together as you get towards that steeper part of the curve. Okay, and then on this outside edge, just the slits. Be very careful as you go that you don't cut through your stitches. Okay, same thing on the other half of the skirt. Slit through both right where it starts to turn into a straight seam. And then I'm going to do triangles on this inside curve closest to me where it's rippling. Okay, and then slits on this outside one. And again, they'll get closer together. This kind of middle part of that curve is where it's the steepest. So mine get closer together there. And then a little bit further apart as I get towards this more shallow portion of the curve. Okay, now we can bust this open. So these are fitted to the hip shape. So this curved area, we need to press on the ham. So spread that over your ham, make sure the sides are completely separated. And then you can bust open those seam allowances and press them. And then once that seam flattens out, you can go ahead and do it just flat on your ironing board. And then same on my other seam. I'm going to go ahead and do the flat portion while I'm here. And then do that curved portion on my ham. Okay, so now we should have a full skirt front for this shell of our garment. So next we're going to attach that to our waistband right here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my waistband piece. Again, make sure you're looking at the right side of it. And the waistband piece should curve down, look like a frowny face almost. And it will look like it has opposing curves with the waist of the skirt here. And then whenever you attach it to the bodice, getting the bodice in here, it will have a matching curve for that seam. So see how these are very similar. These are kind of opposing. So making sure that you have it right side up and that you don't accidentally have it upside down. Okay, so I'm gonna put that right sides together with my skirt waist. There's a center front notch right here. There's also a notch that matches up with that hip seam. And then the corner of the waistband area. And then we can pin in between those reference points. Okay, let's go stitch that at 1/2 inch. So I'm just starting at one corner and working my way to the other corner. This one's a much more shallow curve, so it shouldn't take as much manipulating to get it to match as that hip curve. Make sure as you go over your darts and your seam, or sorry, not your darts, your seams. This is my hip seam allowance right there. Make sure that stays busted open as you pass over it. Okay, let's go press that. Okay, so busting that open, I'm going to trim my threads first. And then for this one, both sides of this one are actually going to be taut. So I'm just going to do slits through both layers. And it's a pretty shallow curve, so I'm doing them every 1.5 inches or so. Be very careful not to cut through your actual stitch line. And then this one we need to press on our ham because it is that curved shape and it's fitting to the curve of our waist. Okay, next is attaching our bodice to the top of all of this. So we've got our waistband here. Now we're ready to attach our bodice. So grabbing my bodice right here, it kind of looks like the waistband is too small, but whenever I open this up, it's got that longer curve on the top edge that should match up to our bodice. So I'm going to flip my bodice down so it's right sides to that waistband. Match up my corner. There is a notch about halfway to the middle where it matches up with the stitch line of your dart. Notch right at center front. Another one for the other dart. And then the other corner. And then we'll just go back and pin in between those reference points. And this one does have a very slight curve, so if you need to bend it over your finger a little bit as you go and as you pin, you can do that. Okay, let's go stitch that at 1/2 inch. Okay, and again, I'm just going to start from one corner and work my way to the other. And I've got a 1/2 inch notch right here at the top, showing me what that stitch line should be. Make sure as you stitch over those darts, again, that they stay folded towards the side that you intended. So that should be towards center front or center back. Okay, let's go press this one. Okay, trim up those threads on either side. And then this one, just like the last, is going to be slits through both layers. Again, it's a pretty shallow curve, so we can do them about every 1.5 inches or so. And then press it on our ham. Cotton side. Okay, so that should complete the full front of our dress. So now we have the full front shell of our dress with our bodice, waistband, and all of our skirt pieces put together. I'm going to go ahead and set that apart or set that aside, and we're going to work on the back shell. So here are all of my back shell pieces. I'm just going to do 1/2 of the back to save time during class, but you'll do the exact same procedure to the other side. So starting with my back bodice, I'm just going to go ahead and choose this right one. And then I need to make sure to get all of the right-hand side pieces together. So waistband, again, it should be straight at center back, and there's a little 1/2 inch notch vertically that shows you where that center back is. And then it's going to curve down just like that front waistband did. So make sure you've got the correct one and that you don't accidentally have the left hand waistband. And then we will have our skirt pieces. So we've got our little hip piece. Okay, and then our side back piece here. And then our skirt back. So these three will get pieced together and then attached to our waistband and then attached to our bodice at the very top. And again, all of those straight seams should go down center back. Okay, we'll piece together our skirt and work our way up just like we did for the front. So put that hip piece together, matching up those corners. Stitch that at 1/2 inch. And just working my way again from one corner to the other. Okay, press that. So trim up those threads. And then this one we can bust open flat. And then I'm going to attach my side front here at this curve. So right sides together, starting at that hem, match up your corner and your notch. Your halfway notch here will be a double notch instead of a single. So we always use that double to indicate the back. So that's how I know the difference between my side back and side front pieces. Should have that same single notch that matches up with your hip seam. And then the very corner. And bend it over your hand to pin those curves together. Are there any questions while I do this? Okay, let's go stitch these together at 1/2 inch. Okay, and just like we did for the front, I want to have the back skirt on top so that I can curve it up as I stitch. So I'm going to start back at the hem. I've got my skirt front and then, or sorry, skirt back and then side back on bottom. And again, just making sure that seam stays busted open as I cross over it. And you can see I'm just curving that up to that curved hip area. Okay, let's go clip and press this one. Okay, so opening this up, I'm going to trim my thread tails. And then, okay, so as it curves into this piece, this edge is rippling. So that's the one that needs to get the triangles taken away. And then that outside edge is where we can just do the slits. Oh, and I need to separate it from the straight area. They can be further apart where it's a shallow curve, and then get closer and closer together as you get towards that steeper part of the curve. Okay, and then just slits for that outside edge. Again, press that curved portion on your ham. And then you can do that flat portion just on your ironing board. Okay, so there is one side of our skirt back. Now we're ready to attach it to our waistband. So again, this waistband should look like it's curving down with those opposing curves right here. I'm going to flip that down, match up that center back corner. There's a notch right where it crosses over that hip seam, and then my other corner. And pin in between. Okay, let's stitch that together at 1/2 inch. Starting at my center back seam or center back corner. Just working my way out towards that side seam, making sure as I cross over that hip seam that it stays busted open. Back to our ironing board. Trim up your threads on either side. And then slit through both layers. So we've got this shallow curve. So we're just going to do slits through both layers, being very careful not to cut your stitch line. And we'll press that on our ham. Okay. Now we need to attach our back bodice. So to this top edge here, I'm going to grab my back bodice, flip that down, match up my center back. And again, there's that 1/2 inch notch that shows us our seam allowance. A notch right in the center that matches up with the stitch line of our dart. And then our other corner. Okay, stitch that at 1/2 inch. Okay, so starting at the corner, this is my center back corner. And again, make sure that dart stays pressed to the side that it's supposed to. And work your way out to that side seam corner. Okay, let's go back to our ironing board again. Okay, trim up those threads. And just like we did the other waist seam, we're going to do slits through both layers. And press it on our ham. Okay, so now we should have our full back. And again, we just have half of it. So we'll have 2 halves once you get the other one done. And you should have a really nice long straight center back seam where we're going to apply our zipper later on. So set that aside. And now we're going to get our inside layers together. So these are all of my front lining and facing layers. We'll do this first and then we'll do the back. So front facing is out of your shell fabric. And then you should have a front bodice lining with those 2 darts that we stitched last time. You should have your front waistband, again, cut out of lining, and then your front skirt. So this one will have less seams than the outside because we don't have all of those piecing areas on the inside of this or on the skirt. Okay, so we just have our 2 darts that we already stitched. Now I'm going to put this skirt seam to that waistband and we'll work our way up just like we did last time for the outside. So center front notch right here. Corners. And then I noticed this morning I had a little bit of a mistake on my pattern. This notch is not quite lining up where it's supposed to be with the dart. So there's a notch here in the middle that should line up with that dart on your skirt, but it doesn't quite line up. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin in between that center front and side. And I'll just ignore that notch right there. Make sure that your dart excess stays pressed to the side that it's supposed to be. So I like to put a pin right through that dart excess to make sure that it stays over to center front. Okay, let's go stitch that at 1/2 inch. Okay, and again, I'm just working from one corner over to the other. Lining is especially slippery. So as I go through this, I'm going to pay special attention to my edges over here, making sure that they don't slip away from each other and that they stay in line with each other. Before I go over that dart, make sure to check it on the bottom that it is pressed over to center front. Okay, let's go press that one. Okay, I'm going to trim up my threads. You can see here where both of my darts are still facing that center front like they're supposed to be. Just like we did on the outside waist, we're going to do slits through both seam allowances. And then press it on our ham. Okay, let's attach this to the top of our lining. So this is our waistband attached to our bodice lining. So this is the front bodice lining. I'm going to flip that down. There's a notch right at center front that you will match up. There are notches that match up with the dart stitch line again, and then the corners. One thing that I didn't mention is whenever you first press that lining, make sure that you adjust the temperature of your iron so that you don't melt your lining fabric. So that last seam that we did was the very first lining seam that we had pressed. So just make sure to turn it down to that polyester setting so you don't melt your lining fabric. Okay, let's go pin or stitch that one at 1/2 inch, excuse me. Okay, and again, lining is very slippery. So if you have it hanging off over here on the left-hand side, if you have it like hanging off the table into your lap, that gravity is going to want to pull your seam over to the left. So make sure to put it up on your table. Try to get it to where it's not hanging, so it's not pulling as much. Keep that dart pressed over as you pass over it. And watch those edges to make sure that they stay even with each other. Let's go press this one. Okay, trim up your threads again. Slits through both seam allowances. And then press it on your ham. Okay, now we're ready to attach it to our facing. So I've got this top curve area. If I pull my facing down to that, you'll see you've got this gap over here on the side. That is that horizontal dart. If you remember on the shell of our dress, we have a vertical dart pointing to the bust and then a horizontal dart pointing to the bust as well. That horizontal dart ends up getting swallowed by this seam. So that's kind of our dart excess. It gets taken up by this seam. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this down so it's right sides together. Oh, my little notch is missing. Where's the halfway? My center front notch on my facing didn't get slit. So I'm going to find that center. Do a little notch there. Okay, so you should have a little notch right at center front to match up. And then your corners. I'm going to pin this from the lining layer. So I'm just going to flip it over, put the lining on top, just because it's more slippery and it's easier to control when it's on top, in my opinion. Okay, and then I'm going to work between that corner and that center front notch to pin these together. There is a slight curve, so you can bend it over your finger as you go. And then same on the other half. Okay, so we're going to go stitch that together at 1/2 inch. But before I go, I just want to show you, see if I can show you from this direction. This will naturally want to curve towards that red. So see how it's kind of curving this direction or towards that facing. So whenever I go to stitch, I'm going to put the facing on top. That way I can curve it up as I sew. Okay, so facing on top, starting at one corner. I'm working my way over. Again, make sure that you check your lining layer on the bottom and that make sure that it's not pulling over to the left. Okay, let's go press that. Okay, so trim up your threads on either end. And then you'll see the blue layer, or my lining layer in this case, is the one that's going to be rippling here. It kind of flattens out here at center front, but over both of those bust areas is where we need to clip. So right here, I'm going for the lining, I'm clipping out triangles and taking away fabric. Okay, and then for the facing layer, I'm just going to do slits. And then same on this other bust area. And you're getting the tip of that slit and the tip of that triangle close down to your stitch line, but not through. So on both sides, that slit and that triangle need to be close to your stitch line, but not through. Okay, let's press this again on our ham. And then we'll move on to our back inside layers. Okay, so that is our full front inside of our dress, facing attached to lining. Set that aside. And the last one we're going to do today is our back inside layer. So again, I'm only going to do half of it to save time. So I should have my back facing. I'm just going to grab one of those. My back bodice lining. Waistband. Which one is the right one? This one. There we go. So waistband there, again, curving down. And then my skirt. Okay, let's start from the bottom and work our way up. So skirt is going to get attached to the waistband at the bottom. This little dart came a little bit unpressed. There we go. So flip that down, match up that 1/2 inch notch at center back. Again, this one, I messed up that notch that's supposed to match with your dart in the middle. So we're just gonna have to do the corners. We'll ignore the dart that's in the middle and just pin from one corner to the other. Okay, let's go stitch that at 1/2 inch. Okay, so starting from my center back corner, and I'm just working my way to the other corner. And then when I go to pass over that dart, make sure that it's still facing center back. Let's press that. Okay, bringing this back over here, we've got to trim our little threads. Open that up, slit through both layers. And press it on our ham. Okay, now we're ready to attach this to our bodice, back bodice lining. So here, flip that back bodice lining down, match up that center back corner. On this one, the notch is correct, so it should match up with that stitch line of your dart. And then my other corner. This is our second to last seam, so we're getting close to being done. Okay, let's go stitch this. Okay, right at center back corner, starting again. Make sure that dart stays pressed towards center back as you cross over it. And let's go press that. Okay, trim those little tails, slits through both seam allowances. Be careful not to cut your stitches, and press on your ham. We've got a lot of repetitive steps today where we're going through those same seam lines for the inside and the outside, front and back of our garment. Okay. Now this is ready to get attached to my facing. So here I should have my facing to where the curves match when they're right side or whenever they're both facing up. But whenever we go to put them right sides together, you'll see they'll start to oppose. So I'm going to put the lining on top again. So just flip it over so the lining is on top. It's easier for me to pin that way. And then I'm going to do my corners first and then work my way through the middle. And I typically pull my lining up to the cotton because the lining's a little bit easier to manipulate than the cotton is. Okay. And now work my way through that curve. Again, just kind of bending it over my finger to get those curves to match as I pin. Okay, and just like the other one where we attach the lining to the facing on the front, I'm going to flip it to where the facing is on top when I stitch. That way I can curve it up as I stitch those together. Okay, so facing on top, I'm starting at my center back corner. And then make sure that my lining is not pulling away from the edge. I can curve it up as I stitch. Okay, let's go press this one. Okay, so trim my threads again. And then for this one, we're gonna need to clip because we'll see here, the lining is rippling or ruffling. So I need to take triangles out there. And then here it starts to curve in the opposite direction. So I'm going to do slits just on this last little bit. And then the opposite on the other one, slits through here. And then when we get to that opposite curve area, take triangles out of the facing. Okay. And this one is actually pretty flat. The fitting in this one comes in that dart. And we don't really have another dart. So this curve is pretty flat to the table. So this one we can actually just press on our ironing board. Okay, you'll do those same steps to the other side of your back. And then you should have 2 full back lining inside pieces.